Hello and good morning. I hope you can all see and hear me. My name is Jan. I'm going to be your technical moderator for today. And before we start the meeting, I'd like to explain how this platform works. I heard that some of you have already used the platform. The first thing you should do is go with your mouse to the bottom of your screen and select your language. If you click on your language, you'll see that 4 languages appear, three languages, French, English and Spanish. So you can choose whichever language you would like to listen to. If, for example, somebody's speaking in English and you would like to listen to the Spanish translation, then you can just click on Spanish and you will hear the beautiful voices of the Spanish translators or interpreters. What also happens when you click on the language is that whenever a message is written in the chat, and when you go with your mouse over that message, then you'll see a translate button. So every message you will be able to see in your own language. So if a message is written in English and you go with your mouse over that message, you click on the translate button, then you will be able to read that message in Spanish or in French, for example. The next thing I wanted to say is, so we have a number of speakers today. Those speakers can always ask for the floor. And how do you do that? Well, on the left-hand side of your screen, you see a hand icon. If you click on that hand icon, there will be a pop-up on my screen so that I will know that you requested the floor. And as soon as I can, I'll give you the floor. Of course, you can, if you have questions during presentations, for example, you can always use the chat function. So important message for the speakers. If you're having your presentation, please, from time to time, keep an eye on the chat to see whether there are any questions from other participants or speakers. If during the event there's a technical problem, which sometimes occurs, we're in a virtual world, so sometimes you do have technical problems. Don't panic, just click on the refresh button of your browser. For those of you who are using Windows, for example, you can just press F5, the F5 button, then the page will refresh, and normally in 95% of the cases, the technical problem should be solved. However, if you keep on having issues, don't hesitate to let me know. Or you can also click on the question mark, which is located on the left-hand side of your screen, all the way in the bottom. And then you will get in touch with the technical support of VoiceBoxer, and they will be able to help you. So without further ado, one more very important thing. So I'll be giving the floor to Susanne in a minute. Susanne, if you can hear and see me, as soon as you get the floor, you will be able to see yourself in this little screen where I am now. So as soon as you see yourself, you can start speaking. You won't be able to hear anyone else, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work. You just maybe the other participants or we will let you know whether we can see you on the chat. And if you have the floor, as somebody pointed out before, if you have the floor, you can also use your mouse to go through the presentation yourself. So if you go with your mouse over the slide, you'll see a left and right arrow. If you click on the right arrow, of course, you'll go to the next slide of the presentation. If you have any questions, do let me know via the chat. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Susanne now. Susanne, could I ask you to click on the hand icon so that I see that you are ready to start? Yes, there you are. Okay, Susanne, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this WAPES webinar, the next virtual webinar we do. I'm your moderator for this event. Which has been organized as a cooperation product of WAPES and the Bundesagentur für Arbeit, the Federal Employment Agency. I think it is an exciting webinar because it's innovative. Its title is Skilled Labor Immigration, a New Role for Public Employment Services. So we are going to discuss what is new and how to shape this. What I would like to ask you, one further formality, is to send me your questions for the question rounds we have foreseen in the general chat, because otherwise I always have to click, and that is more difficult for me. And now I would like to give the floor to the WAPES Vice President, Florence Dumontier, who is also the Director of International Affairs and Relations of Pôle Emploi. Florence, you have the floor.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes.
Hello to all. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm just going to trust the moderator. If you don't hear me, I will see this in the chat. I would like to introduce this conference, this webinar, but first of all to recognize the initiators of this conference, so our dear neighbors, our dear German neighbors, and thank them for the theme that unites us today: immigration of skilled labor and new role for public employment services. I'd also like to thank the members of the Executive Secretariat of WAPES for the organization of this event. We know that in this context of global pandemic, to meet as pairs, as professionals on such an important theme is a great chance for us all in order to be able to continue to develop our network, to see each other's opinions on this important subject. And this theme I'd like to highlight is a theme that brings us back to three main points. First of all, the first issue is the issue of demography. So we're talking about skilled labor immigration, which means an evolution of the world population, and this is very polarized. There are zones, regions in the world where there's a lot of older people, and other regions of the world where there's a lot of young people, and therefore preoccupation strategies are very different and sometimes even opposed. And this is therefore a challenge to talk about these issues together. That's the first theme. The second theme is the issue of human resources in companies. This entails orientation, training, recruitment, follow-up, as well for the small as bigger companies. This subject also affects the governments with recurrent and crucial subjects of political means to act and intervene, to operate with fair regulations, with balance, and this also questions the role of different actors of these public services, of this economic world, these actors that are public and private. Third theme is the subject of international mobility. Traveling of workers, movement of workers with access of employment in the European area for foreign workers. It also questions the equivalence of certifications, mobility, migration, immigration, the question of work around differences, and this is a huge question because it's a question of diplomacy, of economy and sociology, and we need to find a balance there. Finally, I'd like to insist on the current situation we are in and the structural issues that we notice. There's a lot of lack of balance in terms of employment, in engineering, in health. There is a competition between countries, but we also observe that there are other subjects arising in restoration, in the restaurant and hotel environment, with people who are qualified and trained but have no jobs. And we all hope that they will find work again in the future in their branch. These questions of conjuncture question what equation we need to figure out to find and strike a new balance. I hope in the future, with our discussions, we will manage to understand, to read, and maybe even find solutions to move forward on these great questions. I wish you a very fruitful webinar, and I already thank all our speakers. Thank you for listening.
For framing our workshop with your opening. I found it quite important that you mentioned that we have to find a fair equation and that we have a situation where we often have both unemployment together with shortages, and it is not so easy to bridge this mismatch on the labor market. Now I invite you to our round of 4 speakers, and I think we have an excellent excellent composition of speakers. First, OECD framing the whole with international recruitment strategies and success factors, and then 3 different country examples. And so I think we are going to have enough to discuss after these contributions, or after each contribution there will be a small questions and answers round. So while I give the floor now to the OECD, Jonathan Chaloff, who is the head of the International Migration Division, and I don't know anyone who has more knowledge in that field, so he has so much experience, and he is going to share us his results from his worldwide research while I take note of your questions. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Susanne. Thank you, Florence. I just should clarify, I'm not the head of the International Migration Division. I am the, there we go. I'm not the head of the International Migration Division. I'm a senior policy analyst at the International Migration Division, and what I'd like to present to everyone this morning is some reflections based on the work that we've done in a number of OECD countries looking at international recruitment, and specifically the link between the public employment service and the entire migration system. So the title is Strategies and Success Factors, but I think I will end up talking a bit more about failure factors because I think it could be very useful for the discussion. So I have 15 minutes and 8 slides, just to warn you ahead of time, and I'll start right away. So the first reflection, I think, is that the international recruitment is quite complex. The audience today is quite familiar with the recruitment process, so I won't go into much detail, but also, as Florence said at the beginning, there are a number of challenges in international recruitment. Matching involves overcoming information asymmetries between the job seeker and the employer. In a way, we could say it's a bit of a miracle that any international recruitment occurs at all, if you look at all of these barriers, that the language barrier, which is often an issue, the recognition of foreign qualifications, licensing requirements for regulated professions, the migration procedures themselves, which are quite complicated and expensive in most cases, the weak networks that connect job seekers and employers, the absence of a trusted referee, there's a high risk. Employers have to invest quite a bit, in many cases, to bring a worker from abroad, and there's often no face-to-face meetings, so it's a very vulnerable recruitment. Unpredictable. There are cultural differences. Discrimination is a major factor. There's also something that you have to consider in international recruitment on both sides, which is the fact that there's also accompanying family in many cases, and so it's not just about the decision to be hired, but to bring their entire family. the portability of Social Security. So there are so many different barriers. So you wonder how is it even possible that this occurs? And in general, it's true that employers don't like to recruit from abroad for these reasons. They would prefer to find people locally. So if they do recruit, there must be a reason related to shortages and skill needs. In a way, the migration system and the policy attitude is often that the international recruitment is treated with suspicion. Because of all these costs, all of these barriers, the question is who's paying these costs? Is it the worker paying? Often happens, especially for lower skilled migration, and it ends up being the job seeker, the worker, who pays a lot of these costs through rent, through fees, through accepting a lower salary than maybe might be done. So we'll come back to this question about costs at the end when we ask why should the public sector be involved in subsidizing this. But I think that this lays out some of the barriers and that the international recruitment needs to overcome. So here, I think these are all points that are familiar to this crowd about how matchmaking in marketplaces and intermediaries work. In the work that we've done, we've seen an important role in international recruitment of private online platforms, especially for the higher skilled, Indeed, Glassdoor, Monster, LinkedIn, all of these. Job fairs are often a specific response to skill needs, where countries go abroad and organize recruitment fairs for the employers from their country. Sometimes they're sector-based, sometimes they are region-based, but it's an opportunity to overcome some of these barriers. The use of informal and formal networks, informal more for less skilled, but also for higher skilled, diaspora networks and universities, collaboration with headhunters and private agencies. Obviously in this field, the market size counts. The bigger the pool, the bigger the capacity to bring together large numbers of employers and large numbers of job seekers, the better it is. And the final point, I think, is crucial for this discussion, which is what is the link between the job match and the migration process, right? Because there are many matchmakers, but the migration procedures are run by the state. So is there a link between these many private and public matchmakers and the administration which actually manages the migration process? That a link makes sense because it can address some of the higher costs, the complexity, and we'll get into some of the ways that can be a benefit. So what I'd like to focus on in the bulk of my presentation today is this idea of a model where there's a pool of candidates put together, and this is linked to the migration system. This kind of matching and migration model is called expression of interest, where you have candidates for migration who are interested in moving to another country. They put forward their application. If they qualify for an existing migration channel, then they go into a pool of people who could potentially migrate if they had a job offer or some other form of sponsorship or selection. From that group, they're selected, and they're brought, at that point, the migration procedure begins. So you can see this example, this model is functioning in New Zealand, Australia, Canada as the basic skilled migration channel. And it's also, I think we'll hear later from the Korean colleague about how this model is used also for recruitment for less skilled migration, non-professional migration. I think what's interesting here is that you have many people in origin countries that are interested in migrating. Some of them will meet the basic criteria, and then they'll go into the pool. And what happens in the pool? Who gets to see that pool? Do employers association, are they able to look into that pool and pick people out of that? So we're going to go through 3 country examples and take a look at exactly how that works. So in the countries that are using this kind of a system for skilled migration, there are very different models for the link between employers and the pool. So in New Zealand, there's a model which is not run by the Public Employment Service at all, but it's a vast list of candidates. I'll get into that. In Australia, the system used to allow employers to look at these candidates, but then it stopped. And the third example is in Canada, where the Public Employment Service database is closely linked with the migration selection system. So, this is the question: what's the involvement of the public sector in matching and the migration and the link between them? If we take the New Zealand example, I think this is interesting because it's very big. There's a platform where anyone who's interested in moving to New Zealand, who is in an occupation which is mid-skilled or higher, or on a skill shortage list, or qualifies for one of their talent visas, so mid-skilled and higher, can sign up and express their interest on a platform called New Zealand Now. Anyone, you, me, anyone can sign up here, put their profile up. And there are more than 1 million profiles in the system, so it's quite large. And these are all people who are somehow interested in coming to New Zealand. The Immigration Service, so not the Public Employment Service, but the Immigration Service manages this database. And when there are employers who are interested in looking for candidates who meet a certain skill profile, they consult the Immigration Service, who provides them with profiles. It's a very effective system because it's essentially a list of people who'd like to migrate with their profiles. The employer contacts them directly. There is some oversight about what happens, follow-up. But actually, if you look at who's using this system to recruit, it's mostly recruiting agencies. In the end, very few single employers are recruiting directly from this database. It's mostly recruiters and intermediaries who are doing this. So they will ask for profiles. They might get a few hundred. They'll manage these profiles, and that's actually a significant stream. If someone is selected, then the migration process is separate. They go through the visa process separately. The fact that they were in this pool makes a difference for the migration process. I think maybe a few points here is that this doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's a very actively managed pool where the Immigration Service is following up on all the requests that go through. They know the click rates. In other words, they know how many emails that went out to candidates are actually opened and read, and the responses, because they are the ones who manage the initial contact. I think that's part of it is about integrity and avoiding rent taking and so on, which is always an issue in international recruitment. Second example is Australia, and here again it's a system where candidates would express their interest in migrating to Australia, and employers were able to tap that pool. So selected employers could look into the Skill Select pool and look at the expressions of interest and anonymous profiles of different candidates and initiate contact with that candidate. There were some restrictions. The employers could only look at the profiles of candidates who specifically said they were interested in being contacted by an employer and to be sponsored for an employer visa. It was a subset. So what happened was this system was used. Any business really that was officially in the business registry could access the database. But about 2 years ago, the government decided to cut that option. It was not being used very much, and they decided that this was not exactly. It was a very tiny share of all the people who were coming in. So they said it's not really worth our effort. Employers weren't interested in looking at this database, and they weren't sponsoring workers through the database, and so they stepped away from this model. They started off with big hopes that this would be an employer channel, but in the end it didn't work out that way. So that most people who come in, they've either found their employer before they apply, or they come in and look for a job once they've been approved by some other sponsor. Last example, and I think this is maybe the most pertinent for an audience that's representing public employment services, is the Canadian example, and it's for the express entry system. So here, it's an example of an explicit link with the Public Employment Service vacancy database. So Job Bank is the national platform, and it covers most of the country, and has hundreds of thousands of vacancies in it. The issue here, I think, is that well, there are a few issues with how this worked out. At the beginning, the Canadians thought, well, everyone who applies in this expression of interest system, every candidate for migration should be required to post their profile in the national database. And the labor market test is integrated into the system. So any employer who wants to hire from abroad already has a requirement to list that job with the Public Employment Service. And this is true in actually many OECD countries. Anyone who wants to, employers who want to hire from abroad are required already to list their the vacancy in a public system for 15 days or 30 days. It depends on the country. So already the vacancy listings are filled with these jobs that are for international recruitment. And in many of the countries we've looked at, this distorts a bit the kinds of vacancies that are actually being listed in the public employment system. Sometimes you have countries where most of the jobs that are in the vacancy database are only there because of the labor market test requirement. And this is an interesting example for Canada as well. There's also often a mismatch between the kinds of jobs that are in the Public Employment Service database and the jobs for which these skilled migration programs work. So in the Canadian case, for example, there were something like about 10% of the vacancies were in the job bank were eligible for skilled migration, but about 70% of the job seekers were these express entry candidates abroad. So there was only a small share of the jobs that they could actually see, because there was only a small share of the jobs that were eligible for international recruitment. But most of the job seekers had been herded or forced into this vacancy database and job seeker database through the migration system itself. So what happened was in 2017, the Canadian government decided that it didn't make sense to require all these candidates to post their profiles in the system. Many still do, and we don't have any evidence on how many of them end up matching, but what we can suggest that most of the matching occurs outside of this platform. Nonetheless, the two systems are linked, so the migration system is directly linked to the national Public Employment Service system. So I'm coming to my last slide here, and here I just want to discuss this question of what works for the Public Employment Service in international recruitment linked to the migration system. So obviously you have a pool of candidates and a pool of employers and a vacancy listing. You have the strategic fact that the Public Employment Service already plays an important role in the labor market test. That they've already got a lot of vacancies that are going through the system as part of the migration authorization process. So there are a few challenges. The first is that in many of the countries that we've reviewed, there's some reputational issues for the Public Employment Service. There are many actors in matching, and the Public Employment Service often has a reputation of working with less skilled candidates. Often the mandate is to place local unemployed rather than to, let's say, bring workers to the doorstep of the employer. And so sometimes there's a mandate or even a cultural history of operating which is not really compatible with international matching. There's no obligation towards, let's say, job seekers abroad to find, so it's a bit of a challenge for some of these systems. There's the question of how do you attract candidates into the pool? How do you attract employers to post these kinds of vacancies outside of the labor market test requirement? How do you convince employers that somehow listing these vacancies will help them find candidates abroad? We've talked about all of the information asymmetries, how can you build a pool of candidates where you're providing information to the employer, which is clear on their qualifications, that you verified their qualifications, certified them, and so on. Is the job to filter the candidates abroad based on what the documents that they present, on their eligibility for migration programs. There's a question of training into the pool. So what does that mean? This is the discussion now about the skills partnerships and skills mobility, where you actually train people in the country of origin to a certain level so that they become interesting for employers in the destination country. These are expensive programs, so the question is, who pays for this? Do they work? Are they able to produce people, to train people sufficiently? Does it make sense to pay to train people in origin countries? There is a lot of interest here on the side of, let's say, development cooperation, development assistance to support these training initiatives, but there are only a few examples of success. So I think to conclude, there are a few open questions for this process. So one of the key factors is that the match is actually meeting a real labor market need. So what we've seen is that these systems work essentially when employers are desperate. Because it's so difficult to recruit from abroad, and because there's the natural preference for local employees, if there's recruitment going on from abroad, it has to do with the acute need by employers. So is that need really that acute? Can you compete with the private channels in terms of risk and cost and the matching ability? Does it make sense to compete? What's the role for public employment service to public employment service relationships, so government to government, so origin country public employment service, destination country public employment service? Can you find a match where you line up two bodies which have credibility and have the capacity to verify candidates and the capacity to move the process quickly? Sometimes there's an issue of matching the countries. We've seen in some of these programs that government-to-government agreements target migration channels which are not the first choice of employers. So they're not necessarily countries from which employers would have recruited if they had been given a choice, and so you're trying to convince them to change their practices, which is not always that simple. So I think what I've done in the time this morning is raise some of the challenges and given a few examples of how it might be solved. What you can see is that there are quite a few models out there, and no one has really found this magic formula for matching public matching platforms with the migration system to create a kind of a fluid system for bringing the appropriate candidates to employers quickly. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan, for this overview. I think it has shown us the complexity of the whole, and that it is nearly a miracle when it happens, that there are diverse structural models over the world, and each has pros and cons, and that it is worth to further discuss the role of public employment services. At the moment, I do not see any questions in the group. Wait. Here. Yes, questions are coming up in the group chat now. So, just a second. How do countries with shortages attract suitable job seekers to register in the pool of candidates? And who pays? Jonathan, I read 3 questions, and then I give you the floor to answer. The next question is, what are critical factors of success in recruiting the people most needed on the labor market? Is there any experience from other PES where the PES itself has taken an active role in recruitment and matching? I think there we are going to have examples or the German project, but Jonathan, you might contribute your experience. And another question. This is only a technical problem. So with these two questions, I hand over for answers to Jonathan.
Thank you. So some of these questions are answered in the publication that we did last year. But I think that you really ask a really important question. How do you attract candidates to the platform? And I think that the examples I gave are not relevant for many countries, because if you look at New Zealand, Canada, Australia, they're able to count on an enormous pool of potential candidates. Part of it is language, English and English and French in Canada, which allows really a global recruitment pool, not so relevant for countries that don't have a pool of language speakers abroad. I think that there's what the success is partly due to targeted recruitment, working with training institutions. You can find some examples of a sector-specific recruitment, where you might have, let's say, the construction sector, which goes out, reaches out to training institutions in origin countries, and that's one way. The question of who pays. These are expensive systems, right? So if you look at the examples I gave, there isn't a fee for employers to use them. And there isn't a very high fee for the candidates. There's the New Zealand example, there's no cost. That doesn't mean that it's truly free, because the candidates who are applying have to pay for translations of their documents, they have to pay for their certifications, so there are a lot of upfront costs for them. And then once the migration decision is made, there are visa fees and permit fees and so on, which are divided between the employer and the worker. But when there are more challenges, it becomes much more expensive. So in countries that are looking to recruit from abroad, outside of their language basin, and they have to train people in the country of origin, then it becomes much more expensive. So the question is, what's the willingness to subsidize this recruitment process, and does that fall on the employer? I think we'll hear some examples from from some countries after, so I won't go too much into that. The question on the role of the Public Employment Service, looking back at just to see exactly how this was the critical factors of success that are most needed. I think it's, again, it comes back to this question of the clear employer demand and clear employer interest, because in the end, this is the main filter. And are they able to work with people recruited from abroad? Some of the OECD countries have employers who are largely flexible on skills needs. Others have employers who are looking for people who have exactly a certain kind of training and exactly a certain set of skills. And I mean, if we look at Germany, and I'm sure we'll hear about that, employers like to have workers who have German training and German language skills and exactly the field and exactly the experience. So it's very difficult to get international recruitment to work unless there is some flexibility. Other countries, I mean, when we look at Norway or the countries that I gave examples, employers tend to be much more flexible about on-the-job training, about looser skill matches, so people who have a background in chemistry can work in biology and so on. So that flexibility makes a big difference in the capacity for international recruitment to work, that employers have to be a bit less picky about the skill requirements and the qualification requirement. And that only happens when they're fairly desperate in some cases. On the to past question, there are a number of examples. We discussed them in this publication. It doesn't always work. It's not always an ideal match, but sometimes it works when you have, let's say, very low skill thresholds and strong agreements, so that you have employers who are looking for not very high skill levels. So they're able to, they're not particularly worried about the certifying the workers. They're just interested in hands, and those tend to be more successful. I'll stop there.
So thank you very much, Jonathan, for this framing contribution. I remember two keywords. It is a situation of emergency that makes the whole happen, because otherwise nobody is ready to invest so much resources for recruitment. And it needs a lot of strategic efforts and regulation in the background to make it successful. As regards the procedure, I would like to propose a change, and we are a bit behind the time, and I would suggest that we have all three country examples together, and then the question round in the end. So I note your questions and I follow your questions, and now it is my pleasure to hand over to my organization, as I'm seconded from the Public Employment Service Germany, to Alexander Wilhelm, who is the Director of International Relations of the Public Employment Service Germany. And we change the perspective, because the other examples were more supply-driven, expression of interest systems, and now we go to a really demand-driven system and strategy in a kind of emergency situation for employers. So, Alexander, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all see me well and also hear me. So, first of all, as I don't see my presentation yet, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you all for joining us in the webinar today, and let me assure you that we are very upset that we couldn't meet in person with you. It was actually our idea to meet up with you and to have this workshop in Nuremberg in Germany, but due to Corona crisis, closer to the microphone, okay. Is it better now? Okay, I hope it works. Please let me know if there's any other trouble. And please, I would need my presentation actually to start. Otherwise, I just fill the gap with more welcoming words. So, it's here. Okay, it's all the same presentation. Okay, thank you very much. So as I will start directly, as I just have 10 minutes, and I will try to set an alarm clock to be on time and finish on time. And you will see that I've prepared quite a few slides, because the German system is rather complex. And we have, besides this legal role we have as a German employment service in accessing and doing like the labor market assessment for skilled migrants who enter the German labor market, just like a bit like in Canada. We also, as the German Employment Service, we also take an active role in the recruitment and job placement of candidates. And this is why it's a bit more complex, but please see that rather as a background information. And I will not go into detail in all the slides. Disconnected. I hope I'm back. Now it seems the presentation works and sound is good. Okay, so I will shortly introduce you into the framework. So first of all, of course, for us as a European country, we work closely in the field of labor migration, also with our European partner, Public Employment Services in the EURES network. So this is a very important cornerstone of our migration strategy. And apart from that, we have a close cooperation also
with countries outside the European Union and public employment services outside the European Union, selected countries, and but this we do on the basis of bilateral cooperation, and this in the field of recruitment of skilled and seasonal workers. But also, as I already mentioned, we have a legal role, what we call Arbeitsmarktzulassung, with the labor market approval of all skilled migrants who enter the German labor market, no matter if they are recruited via the German Public Employment Service or by private agencies or German employers directly. And also, of course, when we talk about migration, we play a very active role as the German Public Employment Service in the field of forced migration, the integration of refugees into the German labor market. And but this is something we won't go into detail today. So let me quickly outline the general idea of the BA's, the German Public Employment Service, formal approval within the visa process for international qualified workers who want to come and work and live in Germany. So in general, in Germany, you always need a concrete job offer. Of course, we have certain exceptions where someone can also, under certain conditions, come directly to Germany and look for a job in Germany for up to 6 months. This is a new regulation that was introduced also for non-academic professions in March this year with the new Skilled Immigration Act. But in general, we always need a concrete job offer by a German employer. What we do as the German Employment Service, we always check also the job offers, and we compare and check if the working conditions offered for migrant workers are comparable to those of domestic employees in the same profession. And this is one of the very complex things about the German system. In general, migrant workers in the professional field always need their professional qualification certified and recognized in the German system. And I will a bit elaborate on that, but you can imagine already that it is a complex condition. And let me mention one thing. Here you see it's not listed that German employers or the legal framework in Germany requires language skills. But in fact, as Jonathan mentioned already, in Germany, in most of the professions, employers expect at least B1 German language skills, because otherwise it won't be impossible most of the professions to integrate into the working environment, and also to follow the security standards at the workplace and all these things. And so this is why German employers are rather focused on at least, let's say, basic language skills. Of course, this is completely different when we talk about big companies, M&Es like BMW, Daimler, or all the big companies, SAP. Of course, they can easily work with international experts that don't speak German, but 99% of the companies in Germany are SMEs, so companies with less than 250 employees, and they expect normally German language skills. As I mentioned, as a public employment service, we also play an active role in active recruitment itself, and this we do on a bilateral basis, bilateral agreements, government to government, so from one public employment service with other public employment services in our partner countries, or where the public employment service does not exist in this form, or cannot play that strong role in designing the recruitment and job placement process. We also work with other entities, public entities like the Ministry of Labor. And for doing so, we normally agree on a general memorandum of understanding. And based on this, we can also agree on special placement agreements for certain types of skilled workers that are most needed on the German labor market. And this is very important also to mention. We always take into account the labor market situation in our partner countries. So we just work and just recruit in professions where there is an excess supply of labor in the partner countries, and it's designing the overall fair migration process is very important for us. This is something I am not able to elaborate on in that very short time I have. The instrument of bilateral placement agreements, this is something, a specialty in the German system. As I mentioned, in general, candidates coming to Germany need, beside the job offer, already their recognition of their skills, but with the instrument of bilateral placement agreements that can be negotiated by us as the German Public Employment Service with our partners, it is possible to enter the German labor market without having the skills already recognized, and then the process can be started after arrival in Germany. And that actually accelerates and eases the process a lot. And just quickly on our process, so what we did as the Public Employment Service, we carried out the needs analysis for identifying shortages of skilled labor, and especially for the recruitment abroad. This is something that we carried out last year and that was published last year for the first time, and we identified a shortage and the need for recruitment. Of course, that was before Corona crisis in 3 different professional levels that you can see listed here, and that includes a whole variety from care workers, doctors, but also mechanical engineers, plumbers, pharmacists, and cooks, for example. And so you can see there's a very broad variety of needs on the German labor market. And let me mention, of course, we can see also that the German labor market was hit hard by the Corona crisis, and we will see probably all the economic outcomes only next year. But nevertheless, what we can see from the surveys that organizations in Germany have done under the German employers, that we basically see in the midterm perspective that we will continue to need also skilled workers from abroad. So the demographic, the shortages caused on the German labor market by the demographic development will not disappear probably by the effects of the Corona crisis. So we are quite confident that we will be needing active recruitment also for skilled workers from countries outside the European Union, even after Corona. So for identifying potential partner countries, of course, we cannot work with 200 countries in the world at the same time. And of course, we need to take into account the partner structure in the partner countries. We need to consider the qualification standards and many other factors, the willingness to cooperate, for example. And this is why we carried out a very complex potential analysis to identify focus countries we want to work with. And this is something that we are still working on. And this describes a bit, because I'm running out of time already, this describes a bit the general process and the general steps in our cooperation. And please let me mention this, and this is very important for us, because we see the public employment services, although, and that was mentioned by Jonathan, yes, the public employment service and its role, it's very complex and to involve in the recruitment and job placement process for migrant workers. But for us, it's very important. We see the public employment service also as a very important player when it comes to guaranteeing fair migration. And of course, this is why for us it's important that all the services offered in the recruitment and job placement process by the public employment services are free of charge for the job seekers, that we guarantee equal treatment and working conditions for migrant workers, and of course that we always take into account the labor market situation in our partner countries. And this is why we believe that, although it's complex, but we believe that as a public employment service, we have to play an active role in setting good standards for labor market orientated migration. So, and I guess as I'm over time already, I'm done so far, and I'm happy to receive all your questions.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for this insight into the German strategy, which is based upon certain structural conditions, isn't it? For example, the strong role the Public Employment Service has in the approval procedure, and also the strong labor shortages in some sectors, mainly skilled sectors, where I listen carefully that the costs you are ready to invest occur in this, mainly in this field. Now I would like to hand over to our next speaker from Pôle Emploi, France, to Nicolas Simon, who is Head of Department for International Labor Mobility, and who is going to tell us more about the setting up and the plans France has. And please be aware of time, as we are already a bit behind. Nicolas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I'm going to try and ensure that I respect the time that has been given to me. Let me just start with my presentation. There we go. Sorry, I went a little bit too quickly. So as you mentioned, my name is Mr. Nicolas Simon. I'm head of the Department for International Labour Mobility at Pôle Emploi in France. What I would like to put on the table this morning is to look at the different ways that our public employment services looks at international recruitment and international mobility. You're going to see that we have two different issues. We've got French workers who want to go and work abroad, and then we also want to attract foreign and international talented workers to come and apply for jobs in France. Let me just set the stage for you a little bit before going into the different details. What are the international activities for Pôle Emploi? I'll be showing how we represent a very small part of, how this represents a very small part of Pôle Emploi's activities and how we're structured in order to ensure that we can provide these services. To start off with very quickly, therefore, my department belongs to a different direction. It's a Europe and International Relations direction, and this is the umbrella organization for us. And this is based on three different activities. To start off with, look at international cooperation. This is through different partnerships. We actually intervene to support other PESs abroad, and I think that we're looking to really valorize the competencies, the skill sets, and the different know-how. We then have a different unit which look at benchmarking and communication. Why? Because I think that WAPES knows this better than anyone, how important these aspects are. It is very important for us to observe what's happening across the globe with other PESs, and also to understand what the different projects that we're doing are. And then to finish, we've got the service department. It's the International Labour Mobility Department. This is my department. And we also are supported by 7 international mobility teams. They have been put into place within the Pôle Emploi network. We have 7 different team managers, and they head up 62 advisors who are dedicated to international mobility. What does the international labour mobility market look like for Pôle Emploi? My predecessors spoke a lot about the impact of the COVID crisis on what we're doing, and here on the screen you can see the different evolution curves for the number of job seekers that have signed up to Pôle Emploi. If we were to take job seekers from category A, so those are those that have signed up, they are obliged to look for a job on without activities. There was a peak during the first lockdown in the spring of 2020, but for the third quarter there was another peak as well. Nonetheless, we can see that with 3,673,400 job seekers, France has a very high unemployment rate at the moment. If we were to compare this to the international mobility aspect, if I were to look at the activities conducted by my team since the beginning of the year, we have helped 12,167 job seekers. This means that we're actually just the tip of the iceberg if we look at the activity conducted by Pôle Emploi. Even though our as the head of this department, I think that we are really the cherry on the top of the cake. How does this all work? What is our offer of services? You can see on the screen we look at French job seekers who want to go and work abroad, and there are 3 different axes. To start off with, you've got a digital offer of services. This is online, accessible by our website, pôleemploi.fr, and we publish we've published a whole rejigged set of pages. We want this to be a real journey for our job seekers. The first questions, why not go and work abroad? And also we want to have all of the different steps in place in order to ensure that we're able to support not only French people who want to go and work abroad, but also those who want to come back home. So they've been working abroad for 5 or 10 years and then they want to come back to France. The second very important facet of our digital offer of services is our employment store. This is a platform which brings together lots of different apps, and the idea is to help our job seekers to accomplish their research and also to really equip themselves with the right tools that they need to ensure that they're able to go abroad. The second point of leverage here that has also been highlighted by our German partners, international partnerships. Once again, it's a very important environment for us. If we look at how can I articulate this? It is the EURES network. It's very important amongst different European member states. We have free movement of European workers. This is a very interesting facet for us to be able to exploit. We have another important partner if we look at international mobility, being Canada, just because Canada represents the most coveted destination by French workers. We also look at other international mobility schemes. For example, we've got Erasmus+. This is an initiative on a European level that helps job seekers benefit for bursaries so that they can go and work abroad. We also have the Franco-Québécois Youth Office. This means that young French workers can go and have internships in Canada. The third lever here is a customized support. This is something that has been implemented by our team members, our advisors. It's dedicated support for our job seekers who wish to go abroad. This is delivered through 2 webinars, different online meetings. We also have online workshops, online clubs. Everything is online for this customer support, and then we also have put into place a social network for Pôle Emploi, which means that all of the different job seekers who are interested by a potential move abroad, they're able to chat between them, they're able to share information, support each other in their research, and also they can share their tips and tricks for moving abroad.
Another important point, cap 10,000. That's a goal that we've set. If I look at our international labor mobility team, we're currently following about 7,000 job seekers, and we aim to follow up to 10,000 job seekers at once. Of course, we need to take into account the current situation. In France, we are going through a second lockdown, which started in November, and doesn't mean that our agencies have to close. We're still supporting, following our job seekers, and notably for those that are not able to access tools, digital tools, in order to exchange with them online, we maintained our agencies open to follow the people who are not comfortable with digital tools. The impacts of the crisis, it's not a surprise to anybody, I guess. The most affected are the youngest job seekers who arrive on the working market, on the labor market, and look for work, although the companies are looking for a lot more people to employ. So we have worked, the French government prioritized our actions on these young job seekers, and therefore our priority is to welcome and follow these young people in order to find them a solution as quickly as possible so that they're back on the labor market. So also professional training is also a means for us and a lever in order to allow all job seekers who are in a difficult situation and who don't find employment currently to take advantage from this period and to get back to the right level that's necessary on the labor market currently. Now, regarding the international labor offer, as I explained, it's totally delivered digitally, online. This means that we still have contact with our job seekers during lockdown in spring, but also the one we're going through now. And all advisors in international mobility are equipped in order to be able to work from home. So that is remotely. On the question of attracting talented and skilled workers, the first point to take into account, as I've said previously, the level of unemployment in France is quite high. However, we also have sectors that are facing a lack of employment, and that's not a surprise to anybody. Of course, the healthcare sectors, my German colleague talked about a need of doctors and nurses. We've got the same needs here in France, but also healthcare professionals around hospitalized people, but also our elders who need to be accompanied, to need healthcare workers and carers. In construction, this sector is also very affected by the lack of employment. The industry sector is still very well represented in France, and in particular, the food industry needs a lot of workers, and also informatics, and still also needs a lot of workers in our country. So to answer this need of workers, our main answer, of course, is to orientate our job seekers towards these sectors by offering them professional training, which is adapted to the skills needed in these sectors. We don't publicly communicate on a will to attract international or foreign job seekers, because in terms of public opinion, this could be seen in a bad light during this time where we still have a high rate of unemployment. However, we've implemented 2 actions that could help our employers to attract skills from abroad. First of all, we are hoping that Eurest will post our job offers on their portal. So this is a system showing the job offers in France on this Eurest portal. About last week, we had about 250 jobs posted on the European level, and we have a few examples that really show the advantages of this new tool. We then also have a second point. At the same time, we had there a reflection about Brexit and the COVID crisis of spring. We thought that a lot of French people are working abroad and could be interested to come back here. And then we developed a new offer of service for return mobility. So with support for those who wish to return to France. So this is going through a website which has been put online this spring. And also we have offered webinars for people who wish to return and to help them coming back, because actually coming back from abroad to France is actually the same path as the choice to going to work abroad. You need to readapt, even if it's a country that you've known very well in the past. France has changed and you need to readapt to the new conditions of the French labor market. On that subject, our insights for the future. Of course, the situation of unemployment in France improves. We hope so. We have a few actions that are envisaged in future in order to attract talents from abroad. So we need to internationalize our website with pages translated in English, French, English, German, and Spanish. Then the second point is to strengthen our collaboration with foreign countries in order to build actions towards our shortage sectors. So first, linked with the facility created by the network and thanks to our EURES network. We also need to organize online job fairs for foreign job seekers and allow French employers to communicate with these job seekers with the opportunity that they can offer. And then, just as what Germany developed with the concept Make It in Germany, we need to build a marketing approach in order to highlight the positive aspects of living and working in France. These are the main actions that we can think about implementing, but you understand that this all depends on the evolution of the labor market in France, of the evolution of unemployment rate in France, because in a first phase, we need to focus mostly on French job seekers in order that they can find a job on our labor market. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions later.
Our introduction into the French system, and you know how dangerous it can be. Few slides and much to say, so you never know exactly what happens. What I found particularly interesting is that you mentioned the return mobility, that this is also an important factor not to be overlooked, and the very strong role of good online offers. With that, I would like to hand over to our last speaker, Daniel Choi, who is manager at the HR development in Korea, and who is giving us now an introduction into the employment permit system, a long-established system in Korea. And Daniel, could I ask you, you have many slides, maybe you do a little miracle and bring it down to a shorter presentation. Welcome to the floor.
See you guys again. Is everything all right? Thank you. Hopefully today's presentation is going very well. And for the time, so I'm going to talk about employment permit system for foreign workers very briefly. So from now on, I will say it as EPS. So before then, we would like to introduce me and my work a bit. I'm working for a government organization which is called HRD Korea. It's actually a public company under Ministry of Employment and Labor in South Korea. We actually doing for Korean nationals publicly in order to help resolve employment issue by providing slides. Sorry for that. So yeah, resolve employment issue by providing quality human resources development service. So I actually have been doing lots of business since it's established, maybe more than 30 years. And for me, I have been here for more than 4 years, but for this business EPS only for nearly 1 year, so there would be something that I don't know where. So please kindly understand it. So before we start, we go through some contents of today's presentation, overview, key statistics, some challenges and issues, and key achievements, and we finish. It looks a bit confused because there are lots of explanations, but I will try to make it easier. In 1993, the Korean government introduced the industrial trainee system to address labor shortages in SMEs. However, there were following various issues such as corruption in dispatching, desertion of the workplace, overdue wages, and human rights violations. So the EPS was introduced in 2004 to formally recognize employment status of the foreign workers. The industrial trainee system was discontinued in 2007, and it has since been replaced and streamlined as the EPS. So the EPS provides a steady flow of foreign workers to SMEs experiencing a shortage of labor. It's a government-to-government system whose entire process from selection to entry is managed transparently through a computerized system. And next is about some main changes of EPS and countries. As you can see, in 2004, sending countries were only 6 countries and 3 industries. And now, a bit sorry for a bit old data, 16 countries have been introduced to the programs through an intergovernmental MOU. Also, we established an EPS center in each country and have sent staff members to the countries in order to perform our tasks regarding supporting the employment of foreign workers locally. We provide a one-stop service which offers various services that range from selection of foreign workers to pre-departure education, visa issuance, entry, employment education, and support for surgeon and return. I consider the time for 10 minutes. I will skip this process. Just imagine when you hire a worker, it's very simple. Let's have a look at some statistics. If you have a look at country, you will know that the top country which sends foreign workers to Korea is Vietnam, then Cambodia, Nepal, Indonesia, and Philippines. About gender, male dominates the total more than 90%, because normally workplace is very hard and dangerous, and its atmosphere is not that good. So women don't really like it, neither do the employers. So most of female workers are working for service and agriculture sectors. In this slide, manufacturing does overwhelm the other sectors because Korea's economic base is manufacturing, so that most of employers work for manufacturing field. For annual quota, the Foreign Workforce Policy Committee of the Prime Minister's Office, they consider employers' preferences, the number of illegal workers, and other factors to decide the foreign workforce quota for each country. The annual quota started out at 25,000 in 2004, and it has expanded to 56,000 by the end of last year. And I will skip this slide. Also, I've talked this issue, so we'll skip this. So, in terms of illegal stay issues, it's very important to us. Let's have a look at some trends. the rate of illegal stay of EPS workers is in decreasing trend since 2013 due to measures to prevent illegal stay, slightly rebound recent though. The line had been sharply going up from 2010 to 2012, and it has been keeping it constant until now, like about 15% average for 16 countries. So also we have some other trends for illegal stayers. By industry, it seems that manufacturing is the top for being illegal, but for fishery it's more important. By ratio of illegal stay, service and fishery sectors are very poor because workers are trying to run away with the reason of working conditions. So we are normally trying to make some good schemes or training projects for them before they leave their country in order to improve their vocational competency. And by country, rate of illegal stay is high in Vietnam and Mongolia, but it's low in Laos, Nepal, Bangladesh, because I guess there would be some national particular characteristics on each country, but I will skip this. It's kind of complicated. So basically, we can check the reason why workers stay illegally in Korea. We have both views for employer and worker, but the common point for both is economic point. So first, for employer, they are easily manipulate illegal worker with their wage hours using their illegal status as a disadvantage. So for workers' view, it's very simple. It's because they just want money. They get higher wage compared to their countries, and there are more job opportunities and better living life in Korea as well. So what should we do to prevent illegal stay of EPS worker? For the time, I will talk about this very shortly. Actually, it's very theoretical because strengthening measures, strengthening management of especially entry workers, expanding workplace adaptation support, and reinforcing substantiality of cooperation with sending countries. So it's very theoretical, so I will skip this. And key achievement of the EPS. So what would key achievement be? As I said earlier, it would be economic growth for both sending countries and Korea. We have provided jobs for 280,000 workers from 16 countries, and they resolve our manpower shortages of 55,000 businesses. And one thing more important is that we have enhanced transparency of all of sending process so that transmission corruption has been away and foreign workers have been treated equally to Korean people. And this is some international point of view for the EPS. In 2010, in ILO conference, the EPS was evaluated as it pioneers a system of migration management in Asia. And in 2011, we got some awards from the United Nations for preventing and combating corruption in the public service first place. And in 2007, World Bank Conference, they say the EPS as a system of migration management which is recognized decent by the world. Okay, I will wrap it up now, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Great thread. What I noted in case of Korea, you have a well-established system, even if the role of public employment services might need a bit of clarification. But you showed us very well the process support for the workers and biased towards lower skilled workers, but also based on identified shortages in your system. And you managed to make the recruitment fair for the workers. Now I open the floor for the last few minutes for questions. So I collected some questions. For Alexander, we have the question whether you work more with larger companies or with SMEs, and to skilled immigration, up to which management positions does that go? And also the role of training. So the role of training, to which extent you invest in training of the immigrants. And this leads me to the question. I present now all questions and then you can answer them, okay? Nicolas, your return project raised a lot of interest. And so what is the most frequent vocational training you offer, in which branches? And then also for Daniel, the question, are you also expanding your scheme to higher skills levels? And I have the health crisis. Many host countries, any migration programs include. In that, maybe I take up a last question about special measures in the health sector. That is all. Maybe you give a brief answer, if that is possible, just some keywords, because the time for this webinar ends soon. Alexander, could you please start?
So I will try to answer the three questions very briefly. So first of all, we are not focused on big companies. Of course, we see more our duty also to fulfill the needs that occur in SMEs in Germany. So we do have special programs also and projects for the recruitment, for example, for experts for small handicraft firms that normally have less than 50 employees. So we do have that small and medium-sized programs as well. And because we see it, as we see it, like the bigger companies normally are able to recruit abroad themselves. But nevertheless, of course, as the German system is so complex, we also support bigger firms, let's say, for example, the Deutsche Bahn, which is a national rail company in recruitment. So we have a diverse strategy. Open to all sizes of employers. And that's the same when we are talking about the skill levels. Our focus, but let me say this clearly, is not the recruitment of very specialized, well-paid experts. This is a market that is normally, this is a sector where we have a well-functioning private market and where the companies are willing to pay and invest money in headhunting firms to recruit these experts abroad. So we are rather focused on the, let's say, medium-term level of skilled professionals, as I said, nurses, also like experts in the handicraft sector, but also engineers, but people that normally do need some kind of investment also for being integrated successfully into the labor market, and are not the international experts that are also in the databases of all the private recruitment agencies. And regarding the question on the investment, we take, so first of all, all our services for the recruitment and the job placement services are for free for the employers and also for the employees. So this is all the services gathering the selection of the candidates, organizing the migration process, and these things. This is something that are already covered by the public employment service. But of course, all the additional costs that occur are normally paid by the employers. That also applies for acquiring the language skills before leaving the home countries. This is something that is normally paid in our programs by the German employers. And after arriving in Germany, we do offer and assist the employers in finding the right qualification measures when it comes to further language training. And for this, we do have public funds in Germany that are paid by another institution. That's our national organization for migrants and refugees, who has a special program for language training for migrants. And when it comes to the adaptation measures to reach the national level of the qualification level and in Germany and close the gap between the foreign educational degree and the skill level in Germany, we do have the possibility also as the public employment service under special circumstances, and this is something, it's a very complex system also in Germany, but under special circumstances, we do have the possibility to financially support the employers to cover that cost, because normally they need to be covered by the employers.
Nicolas? You do not have to wait for me. I would suggest now Nicolas answers the question about training in France, and then Daniel, the question he got, quite briefly, some keywords, more we cannot do. Okay?
Thank you very much. So the question looking at training in France. The French government has implemented different plans, and this started in 2017. It's the investment plan for skills. More than 15 billion euros were invested in 2017 in order to train up job seekers to meet the demands of the most demanding sectors. This was something that was implemented within different French regions through the regional councils, but also hand in hand with Pôle Emploi. How did we choose the different sectors? We carried out a diagnosis process. This is something that was conducted in each of the different regions in the territories to better respond to the needs of the local labour markets. Behind this, Pôle Emploi was able to develop different tools to better support this implementation. Why? Because we've seen that just bridging the gap between the number of vacancies and the number of job seekers wasn't actually enough in order to have a real understanding of the needs of the labour market. Therefore, we implement different surveys every year, which means that we have a very large panel with different enterprises and businesses in order for us to be informed and better understand what they're hoping and the types of job profiles that they're hoping to recruit over the course of the next years. This means that not only do we have an idea of what the labour needs will be, but also these skill sets. This gives us a better understanding on the territorial labour markets within the different French regions. It's very difficult for me to give a concrete answer to this question, because if we were to compare Brittany and the Rhône-Alpes region, the things that are at stake are completely different, and therefore the trainings that will be elaborated will be different as well. I hope that I answered your question. And I think that there was a second question from our colleague for the OECD. What are the costs for the employers using these different channels? In France, it's free of charge for employers. This is one of the principles that we have. The service provision of Pôle Emploi is given free of charge not only to job seekers but also to employers.
Okay, so to answer Alexander Wilhelm's question, normally only for low skilled level workers. What I have just said for presentation is just for low skilled level workers, and for Jonathan's question, it's normally reasonable price to have foreign workers for business owners, so they have no complaints. Yeah, is that all right? Yeah, that's it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much to all of you. I think you agree it was worth to start the discussion on this topic. We found out that it is a complex topic, that it is a complex process, and we learned a lot about support needed and delivered over the process, that there are different models. What is the role of PES? There can be different roles supporting those who return, supporting those in other countries to come. So, and how to make it fair. Also, Korea gave us an example, also showing that this needs support over the whole process for the workers. And in other cases, skilled labor, it might also be support or exchange with the partner countries, including the public employment services. So we learned that the Public Employment Service Germany would like to continue this discussion, hopefully at a real physical conference next year, to deepen it and to have more time. What I would like to do is now to close. Let me thank all of you, all the speakers, all the interpreters, and a voice box for the platform support, and the WAPES team who supported me. And I would like to invite you to the next event, WAPES event, that is going to happen next week on 26th. Malaysia initiated a web conference on the impact of the COVID pandemic on the labor market, and I'm sure that will be interesting for many people. So with this, I say goodbye virtually, unfortunately not seeing anyone, and see you next time at the next WAPES conference. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you, Susanne, and thank you for being the moderator today. It was a pleasure working with you. I'd like to thank all of the participants as well for their patience, and thank you for your confidence in VoiceBoxer, and also I'd like to thank the VoiceBoxer technical support, and also, of course, our brilliant team of interpreters. Have a good day and see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.